My husband's secret family showed up at his funeral before the dirt even touched his coffin. They demanded his company, my house, and every dollar he left behind. So I let them have it. And that was the first mistake they made. My name is Mara Bennett. I was 34 when Ethan died, young enough that people kept saying the word widow like it was a coat that did not fit my shoulders. For 3 days, I believed the worst thing that could happen to me had already happened. Ethan had collapsed in his office from a heart attack so sudden that his assistant thought he had dropped his phone. By the time the ambulance arrived, the man I had loved for 6 years, fought beside for 6 years, slept beside for 6 years, was already gone. I remember the funeral in fragments because grief does that. It does not give you one clean memory. It gives you sharp pieces you keep stepping on. Cold rain over Chicago, black umbrellas opening like wounds, the smell of lilies too sweet in the chapel. Ethan's mahogany casket polished so brightly that I could see my own hollow face reflected in it when I leaned close. My wedding ring felt loose on my finger because I had barely eaten since the hospital called. The funeral was small but expensive, exactly the kind of service Ethan's family liked. Quiet money, tasteful grief. Tech executives in dark coats stood beside neighbors who had only known us from holiday parties. People touched my arm and said, "He loved you so much." And every time they said it, I nodded like the sentence did not split me open. Lorraine and Charles Bennett arrived late. That should have hurt me more than it did. But by then, I had already learned that Ethan's parents measured emotion by audience size. They had ignored every call I made after Ethan died. Lorraine had not asked whether I was eating. Charles had not asked whether I needed help choosing a coffin for his son. They walked into the chapel like they were arriving for a board meeting. Lorraine wore a black dress so perfect it looked hostile. Charles kept his eyes on the carpet. Then I saw the woman behind them. She was blonde, polished, and crying in the careful way people cry when they know they are being watched. One hand held a tissue. The other rested on the shoulder of a little boy in a navy coat. He was maybe 5. Small, solemn, confused by the number of strangers staring at him. I knew before anyone told me. My body knew before my mind could survive it. The child had Ethan's blue-gray eyes, Ethan's jawline, Ethan's half-smile, the one that lifted only on the left when he was nervous. He even rubbed his thumb against his fingers, the same tiny habit Ethan had when he was thinking through a problem. For a second, the chapel disappeared. There was only that little boy, and the way my dead husband's face lived on him with impossible cruelty. I must have looked too long because Lorraine stepped in front of him like I was the dangerous one. "Don't you dare look at him like that," she snapped. The room went quiet. My mouth moved before sound came out. "Who are they?" Lorraine lifted her chin. She did not lower her voice. In fact, I think she wanted the whole room to hear. "This is Tessa Monroe. She was Ethan's real love. And this is Oliver, Ethan's son, his only son, his rightful heir." Someone gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." A phone came out near the back pew. Then another. I stood beside my husband's casket and felt every eye in the room crawl over my face, waiting to see whether I would collapse. For 6 years, Ethan had told me it was us against the world. For 3 years, I had let nurses take blood from bruised arms while Ethan held my hand through fertility treatments. He had kissed my forehead after failed IVF cycles and whispered, "One day, This room will be loud. He had cried with me into the parking lot of a clinic after the doctor said the transfer had not worked. I had believed those tears belonged to me. Now, I was looking at a 5-year-old boy who proved that while I had been counting injections and negative pregnancy tests, Ethan had already been a father in Ohio. Lorraine kept talking. Mara, I know this is humiliating for you, but Ethan wanted the truth known. He was trying to leave. He stayed because you were unstable and because the company could not survive a scandal. My fingers went cold. Not my hands, my fingers, as if my body were shutting down piece by piece. That was when Derek Cole stepped forward. Derek was Vanessa's husband, Ethan's brother-in-law, though he liked to introduce himself as a financial strategist. He had the kind of confidence men rent when they are terrified the world will discover they are average. His navy coat looked expensive. His smile looked rehearsed. He carried a sealed envelope like a priest carrying a weapon. Mara, he said, loud enough for the guest to hear, Ethan made arrangements. He handed me the envelope over my husband's open grave and smiled like he had waited years to watch me read it. I did not open it at first. I stared at his hand, at the heavy signet ring he wore even though he came from nothing, at the rain gathering on the envelope's edge. Derek leaned closer. You should read it before you embarrass yourself. So I opened it. Inside was a copy of an updated will. It said Ethan Bennett left Helix Bridge Systems, his tech company, to a trust for Oliver Monroe. It said the Chicago mansion would transfer to that same trust. It said all liquid accounts, investment accounts, founder shares, and personal assets would be held for Oliver's benefit. It named Tessa, Lorraine, Charles, Vanessa, and Derek as controlling parties. My name appeared once. Mara Bennett shall receive no distribution. Derek watched my face as I read it. He was hungry for pain. Some people cannot feel powerful unless someone else is bleeding in front of them. Ethan made sure his real family was protected, he said. Tessa gave a soft sob and turned into Lorraine's shoulder. Her performance was not bad. I believed for a moment that she had loved him too. That made it worse. She might have been lied to. She might have believed Ethan when he told her I was the obstacle. But she still chose to stand at his funeral, in front of his wife, and let the world watch me become a rumor. He promised he would leave her, Tessa whispered. He said she trapped him financially. He said she threatened to ruin him if he walked away before the next funding round. I started. Lorraine cut me off. You never gave him a child. That is what you never did. Oliver is the son this family prayed for. The Bennett name continues through him, not through your empty little tragedy. There are insults that hit the surface, and there are insults that find the exact wound. Lorraine had always known mine. She had sent me articles about fertility diets. She had asked at Christmas whether I was doing everything the doctors said. She had once touched my stomach in front of guests and said, "Still nothing?" Vanessa stood beside Derek, beautiful and cruel in the bored way of people who have never had to fight for a place at any table. You were lucky Ethan let you play wife this long, she said. Pack your things. The house will be inventoried in 48 hours. Derek added, Probate counsel is already being retained. If you contest this, I will freeze every account you can touch. I will remove you from company access. And I will make sure everyone knows you tried to steal from a child. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not healed, not hardened completely, shifted. I stopped listening like a wife and started listening like the person they never asked me to be. Derek kept saying assets. He said it with pleasure. Company assets, residential assets, liquid assets, founder assets. He never said liabilities. He never said debts. He never said tax exposure or encumbrances or contingent obligations. Grant Wexler, the family attorney, was not there, which meant Derek was moving faster than his own lawyer. The will might have been real, but the speed was reckless. Greedy people always rush when they think the prize is unguarded. I looked up at him through rain and funeral flowers. "Monday," I said softly. "You said you are coming Monday?" Derek smiled because he thought the tremor in my voice was fear. "Monday morning." I nodded, turned away from the grave, and walked past the mourners without another word. They thought I left because I had nothing left. The truth was, I had just stopped looking at them like family and started looking at them like a failed acquisition. I did not go home after the funeral. I could not face the mansion yet. I could not face Ethan's shoes by the door, the coffee mug he had left in the sink, the unfinished nursery at the end of the hall. That room had one wall covered in soft green paint samples and a rocking chair with tags still hanging from the arm. We had bought it after our second IVF consultation, back when hope still made us reckless. There was a tiny stuffed elephant on the shelf because Ethan had said every baby needed one ridiculous, loyal friend. Instead, I drove downtown with wet hair and a dead phone and parked beneath my office building. At 7:14 p.m., Julian Mercer called me. Julian was my attorney before he was my friend. He had helped me structure private business holdings years before Ethan and I married, back when I still believed love and separate accounts could coexist without becoming a prophecy. "I heard," Julian said. He did not say he was sorry first, and that was why I trusted him. He knew sorry was too small. "How much?" I asked. "The legal community is already gossiping." "Mara, listen to me. A spouse cannot simply be erased that easily. We can contest the will. We can challenge capacity. We can challenge paternity. We can freeze corporate transfers. We can drag the Bennetts into a probate war they will regret." "No." Silence. "Mara, I do not want to fight, Julian." "You should." "I want them to win," I said. My voice sounded strange even to me. "I want them to win so completely that they stop checking the floor beneath them." Julian exhaled slowly. "What did you see?" "Too much hunger, not enough caution." He understood then. People think revenge begins with rage. Sometimes it begins with pattern recognition. By the time I left the parking garage, Derek had already begun. My joint credit card declined at a gas station. The woman behind the counter looked at me with pity when I tried a second card, and that one failed too. At home, I logged into our joint account and saw a restriction notice. Mortgage escrow frozen. Savings locked pending probate review. Utility autopay suspended. Even my grocery delivery account declined the card on file. Derek had obtained an emergency order claiming I was a flight risk and might drain marital assets before the estate could be protected for Oliver. He had painted me as unstable before my husband was even buried. That night, I finally walked into the mansion. It was too quiet. Grief makes a home sound accused. Ethan's coat still hung near the door. His running shoes were angled under the bench. The kitchen smelled faintly of the cinnamon coffee he liked, though the pot was empty. I went straight to the nursery. I do not know why people say you fall to your knees as if it is dramatic. Sometimes your legs just stop negotiating. I sat on the floor under the paint squares and opened Tessa's public tribute page on my phone because pain makes you press the bruise. There were photos. Ethan with Tessa on a porch, Ethan with Tessa at Christmas, Ethan holding a newborn wrapped in blue, Ethan at Oliver's first birthday, smiling with cake on his shirt, Ethan in Ohio on a lake teaching a toddler to hold a fishing pole. He looked younger in those photos, not because he was younger, but because lies had made him light. Then I saw the date under the newborn photo. The week Oliver was born was the same week my first IVF transfer failed. I remembered Ethan leaving me in bed with cramps and hormone headaches, kissing my temple, saying there was an investor emergency in Columbus. I remembered telling him to go because I was trying to be the kind of wife who did not make his dreams smaller. He had come back with flowers. He had cried when I cried. He had been holding his son. That was when I broke. Not elegantly, not quietly. I cried until my throat hurt and the stuffed elephant blurred into a gray shape on the shelf. I cried for the baby I had imagined, for the marriage I had defended, for the version of Ethan I had built inside my head because I was too loyal to suspect the real one. Then, near midnight, the crying stopped. Not because I was fine, because something cleaner had arrived. I walked into Ethan's office, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and removed the secure laptop he did not know I owned. I connected through a private network and logged into Blackstone Hollow LLC. Derek had frozen the money Ethan wanted him to see. That was his first financial mistake. Blackstone Hollow held a little over $3 million in liquid capital, separate business accounts, a leased penthouse downtown, and a network of professionals who knew exactly what I did for a living. Ethan had never asked many questions about it because Ethan liked believing he was the impressive one in our marriage. That was another mistake. I called Julian back. Pull every filing connected to Helix Bridge Systems, I said. Tax records, loan agreements, vendor payments, board minutes, UCC filings. If Ethan lied about a child for 5 years, he lied about the books too. Julian was quiet for 1 second. And if the books are clean? I looked at the nursery door. They are not. They never asked what I actually did for a living. Ethan's family thought I was some kind of administrative assistant because once, years ago, Lorraine asked what I did and Ethan answered for me. Corporate operations, he said vaguely, and Lorraine decided that meant I organized calendars. I never corrected her because I did not care what she thought. That was the luxury of being underestimated. You learn who people are when they think you are not worth impressing. In reality, I was a senior corporate restructuring specialist. I dismantled companies that were already rotting from the inside. I came in when founders had lied to lenders, when executives had hidden losses, when payroll had been temporarily redirected, when families fought over businesses they did not understand. I read balance sheets like crime scenes. I knew the smell of panic inside a spreadsheet. They thought I filed invoices. I liquidated companies. The next morning, I went to Helix Bridge Systems. The lobby was all glass and brushed steel, the kind of expensive minimalism Ethan loved because it made chaos look funded. I had stood beside him when he cut the ribbon. I had hosted employee dinners. I had rewritten vendor payment schedules at midnight when Ethan claimed the finance team was overwhelmed. I had listened to his fears and steadied his hand before investor calls. My badge blinked red. The security guard looked at the reader, then at me. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry. Try it again." He did. Red. Before he could apologize a second time, Derek appeared near the elevators with Vanessa beside him. He was smiling already. That told me he had been waiting where he could watch. Mara, he said, this is private property. Employees slowed behind the glass conference room. A junior accountant I recognized stared at the floor. The HR director went pale and did nothing. Engineers whispered near the espresso machine. Derek had chosen the lobby because he wanted witnesses. I came to collect Ethan's personal items, I said. You came to interfere with company operations. I have emergency executive control pending probate confirmation. I am acting CEO for the trust. Helix Bridge belongs to Oliver now. Vanessa laughed softly. This must be awkward for you. It is my husband's company. Derek stepped closer. You were sleeping in the founder's bed, Mara. That does not make you part of the business. A few employees flinched. He wanted them to. Cruelty is more satisfying to men like Derek when it has an audience. I let my hands shake. I let my voice thin. Please, just his photographs, his jacket, anything. No, Derek turned to security. Escort her out. The guard looked miserable. I lowered my head and let him guide me through the revolving doors like a defeated widow. Outside, cold air hit my face, and the glass reflected a woman I barely recognized. Wet eyes, pale mouth, shoulders curled inward. Inside, I was counting. Derek had taken operational control without an audit. He had declared himself fit to manage Helix Bridge. He had moved to block an independent executor. Control meant authority? Yes. But it also meant responsibility. Greedy people love the first word and ignore the second. I called Julian from the sidewalk. He is sitting in Ethan's chair, Julian said. Good. Mara, if we do not object now, the court may treat his control as evidence you acquiesced. Let him sit, I said. Let him leave fingerprints everywhere. That afternoon, an anonymous email arrived at an address I had not used publicly in years. Subject: payroll irregularities. The message was short. You should look at the tax escrow accounts. Ethan made accounting reroute payments. People will get hurt if this stays buried. Attached was a cropped screenshot of internal transfers between accounts that should never have touched each other. That email was the first loose thread. When I pulled it, Ethan's entire empire started coming apart in my hands. Before I could pull much, though, they made sure the world watched me bleed. Tessa went public 2 days after the funeral. Her tribute post spread faster than truth ever does. There were photos of Ethan holding Oliver as a baby, Ethan at preschool pickup, Ethan wearing a paper crown at Oliver's birthday, Ethan and Tessa in matching sweaters in front of a Christmas tree. The caption was written like a confession but sharpened like a knife. She said she and Ethan had been high school sweethearts who found each other again. She said Ethan had been trapped in a loveless marriage by a woman who cared more about money than happiness. She said he had spent years trying to leave me peacefully. She said his final act of love was protecting his son from the person who would have erased him. The comments filled with strangers who did not know me but were eager to sentence me. You kept a father from his child. Greedy widow. Oliver deserves everything. Imagine being so bitter you fight a child. A woman I had considered a close friend messaged me, I do not know who you are anymore, then blocked me before I could answer. I did not respond publicly. I saved everything. Tessa's post, Vanessa's comments, Lorraine's replies about truth finally coming to light. Derek's LinkedIn post about stepping up to protect a child's legacy during a difficult transition. Every lie went into a folder named Public Lies. Then Tessa sent me a private message. It was a photo of Oliver sitting on the sofa in my Chicago living room. My sofa, my windows behind him. Tessa was beside him, wearing a diamond pendant I recognized immediately because Ethan had given it to me on our second anniversary. I had lost it 8 months earlier and blamed myself for being careless. Her message said, "Ethan always said this house felt more like mine than yours." My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a long time. I wanted to write something ugly. I wanted to tell her she was not special, only scheduled. I wanted to hurt her because she had found a way to stand inside my home before I had even packed my husband's toothbrush. Instead, I screenshotted the message. On Monday morning, Derek arrived with Lorraine and Vanessa. He did not knock. I was wearing the gray sweater Ethan used to say made me look soft. It was too big, fraying at one cuff, the kind of thing a grieving woman might disappear inside. Derek looked pleased when he saw it. "We are here to secure trust property," he said. Lorraine walked past me and began removing wedding photos from the hallway. Vanessa opened the front closet and started throwing my coats onto the porch. When I asked her to stop, she smiled and dragged an armful of clothes across the wet lawn. Neighbors slowed their cars. Derek handed me a $50 bill between two fingers. "Take a bus. That should be enough for someone like you." Lorraine glanced at my clothes in the mud. "You got the mud because that is all you ever earned." I begged for one more night. I made my voice crack. I let tears slide down my face while Vanessa recorded me on her phone. She wanted footage of the greedy widow being removed from the child's house. I gave her a perfect performance. What she recorded and did not understand was unlawful pressure, hostile possession, physical seizure, removal of personal property. Derek documenting his own takeover with the confidence of a man too vain to fear consequences. When they finally shoved 2 suitcases at me and locked the door from the inside, I walked down the driveway bent like grief had broken my spine. I kept walking until I turned the corner. Then I straightened. I texted Julian, "Residential assets seized. They took possession willingly." His reply came a minute later. "Then the trap is forming." I got into a rideshare headed to the penthouse Blackstone Hollow had leased 18 months earlier, back when I first considered expanding my consulting practice. Ethan thought I used it for client meetings. He never liked going there because the building required biometric access and did not flatter him. The elevator opened directly into the unit. No wedding photos, no Ethan, no nursery, no lies pretending to be memories. There were 4 monitors on the main desk, encrypted drives in a locked cabinet, corporate case files arranged by industry, and a server rack humming softly in the utility room. I took off the gray sweater and dropped it over the back of a chair. For the first time since the funeral, I looked like myself. Ethan had been smart, but arrogance makes smart people lazy. He used strong encryption where clients could see it and childish patterns where he thought no one would look. For personal ledgers, he reused pieces of old passwords, college mascot, childhood street, the year Helix Bridge Incorporated, the name of a dog he claimed not to miss. I had watched him type similar keys for years. By dawn, I was inside a hidden cloud directory labeled Project Lantern. The first layer was ugly but ordinary. Fake vendor payments, Ohio consulting firms with no real offices, licensing fees to shell companies registered through services that sold anonymity to men who confused secrecy with intelligence. Marketing expenses that aligned perfectly with Tessa's rent, Tessa's car, Oliver's birthdays, Oliver's private preschool deposit, transfers after Lorraine's visits, reimbursements for client development on weekends. Ethan told me he was traveling for investors. Company money had funded his second family. I should have felt fresh pain. Instead, I felt the cold focus that arrives when numbers stop being personal and start being evidence. The anonymous payroll tip led me deeper. Employee paychecks showed federal and state tax withholdings. On paper, the money had been deducted. In reality, large portions had not been properly remitted. Ethan had diverted payroll taxes into internal holding accounts, then into shell accounts, then into whatever emergency needed feeding that month. Cars, homes, a hidden family, investor optics, old debts disguised as growth. The missing amount was just over $8 million. Let me explain it the way I explained it later to people who had never read a tax escrow statement. Imagine your employer takes taxes out of your paycheck. You see the deduction. You trust that money has gone to the government because that is the law. Then you discover your employer kept it, moved it, spent it, and left your name attached to the consequences. That was what Ethan had done to his employees. It was not only betrayal, it was theft with better stationery. But even $8 million missing did not explain the pressure I saw in the cash flow. There was something else. A company does not rot that cleanly from one wound. At 3:11 a.m. on the second night, I found the loan, $5 million from Orchid Gate Capital, a private lender whose contracts read like traps written by lawyers who did not believe in sleep. The interest rate was obscene, 30% monthly compounding after default. One missed payment triggered acceleration. Acceleration meant the entire balance became due immediately. The lender held seizure rights over pledged collateral. This was not a loan. It was a bear trap with a wire transfer attached. Then I opened the collateral schedule. The Chicago mansion was listed. So was Lorraine and Charles's retirement home in Ohio. So was Derek and Vanessa's Atlanta estate. For a moment, I truly stopped breathing. Ethan had pledged the mansion using a forged version of my signature. He had used old surety forms Charles had signed years earlier, likely without understanding they could be revived and attached to a new obligation. Derek's advisory board paperwork had been used to cross-collateralize his estate under a clause so dense even a careful person might miss it. Derek was not careful. Derek liked titles. Ethan had known that. My husband had not only betrayed me, he had betrayed Tessa, his parents, his sister, Derek, his employees, and the little boy they were all using as a shield. He left Oliver a nightmare wrapped in inheritance paper. For the first time since the funeral, I stopped asking whether Ethan had ever loved me. A better question was whether Ethan had ever loved anyone. Julian came to the penthouse the next morning with coffee and the face of a man preparing bad news. "If you sign away your rights too early," he said, scanning the documents, "you could truly lose the house. Not just strategically, actually." I know. If Derek audits before accepting liabilities, he can back away from some of this. I know. If Orchid Gate refuses to sell, you do not control timing. I know. He looked up. Mara, this is not a revenge fantasy. This is a knife bridge. I have crossed worse things with less information. No, Julian said gently. You have crossed other people's disasters. This one is yours. That nearly got through. I looked at the monitor where Ethan's loan schedule blinked in neat rows. The next payment was due in 5 days. Derek had 5 days to discover the bomb. I had 5 days to buy it before he knew it existed. I called Nolan Pierce. Nolan was a distressed debt broker who had once described himself as a man who buys burning buildings from people who still call them warm. He had helped me unwind a manufacturing collapse in Indiana and a hotel receivership in Nevada. He understood immediately. Dead founder, he said. Messy probate. Toxic note, multi-state collateral, new acting CEO with no due diligence. That is not a loan file. That is a Shark Tank. I need Blackstone Hollow to own it. If OrchidGate smells family drama, they will raise the price. Then make sure they smell a faceless vulture fund. Nolan laughed once. There she is. He approached OrchidGate through a chain of brokers long enough to hide my interest. His pitch was simple. The founder was dead, probate could delay collection, new leadership was unstable, collateral was spread across multiple states, fraud might cloud enforcement, and immediate cash was safer than a public fight. He offered $1.1 million for the note. They countered at 3. Nolan told them to enjoy explaining payroll tax fraud to a bankruptcy judge. They came down. At 4:36 p.m. on the 4th day, Blackstone Hollow LLC purchased the OrchidGate note for $1.85 million. I wired the money with hands that did not shake. Blackstone Hollow now owned the $5 million principal, the default rights, the collateral liens, the acceleration clause, and the right to foreclose after default. More importantly, I owned timing. I owned silence. I owned the bomb Derek thought was treasure. I did not stop there. I assembled a whistleblower packet for federal investigators. Tax escrow records, shell company names, transfer dates, payroll withholding discrepancies, vendor invoices tied to fake firms, documentation showing Derek had assumed operational control after Ethan's death. I did not write it like a wounded wife. I wrote it like a forensic report. Emotion is useful in confession. It is useless in evidence. Julian delivered the packet through protected channels. 2 hours later, he called again. Derek has filed a personal guarantee to demonstrate management capacity. I closed my eyes. Of course he has. He listed his own assets. Lorraine and Charles backed the family trust. He is trying to prove the trust is strong enough to control Helix Bridge without court supervision. He wants the court to think he is powerful. He is tying himself tighter. Derek wanted the court to believe he was strong enough to own Ethan's empire. I only needed the court to make him say it out loud. So I surrendered. Not really. Never really. But I made sure Derek believed it. I instructed Julian to contact Grant Wexler, the attorney representing Derek and the Bennetts. The message was careful. I was emotionally exhausted. I lacked resources. I did not want to keep fighting. I wanted basic living money released in a clean separation. I would not contest the will if the family trust took everything and released me from further involvement. Grant was not stupid. That mattered. A stupid attorney would have made the trap too easy, and easy traps make judges suspicious. Grant called Julian twice to clarify terms. He asked why I was willing to waive claims. He asked whether I had been advised of spousal rights. He asked whether I understood assets could appreciate. Julian gave him exactly what he needed to hear. My client wants peace. She has been publicly humiliated. She wants to disappear. Derek heard that and tasted blood. The mediation took place in a conference room with beige walls and bad coffee. I arrived in the gray sweater, faded jeans, no makeup. I had spent 20 minutes making my eyes look redder than they were. My hands trembled when I signed in. Derek arrived like a man entering a victory party. Vanessa wore white, which felt like an insult she had planned. Lorraine and Charles looked dignified and smug. Tessa came with Oliver, a choice that made Grant visibly uncomfortable. She held the child against her hip as if daring anyone to question her presence. I looked at Oliver only once. He was coloring on a notepad, unaware that every adult in that room was using his name to move money and blame. I did not hate him. I never hated him. He was the only innocent person Ethan had left behind. Derek sat across from me and smiled. This can be simple if you stop performing. I lowered my eyes. I do not want to fight anymore. Lorraine made a sound of satisfaction. I cannot keep living like this, I continued. My accounts are frozen. People think I'm a monster. I have no access to the house or the company. I just want enough money released to relocate and start over. Vanessa leaned back. That is the first reasonable thing you have said. Grant folded his hands. Mrs. Bennett, you understand that you may have statutory rights as a surviving spouse. I understand. And you are prepared to waive those rights? I let the silence stretch. Derek mistook it for pain. I do not want anything to do with the company, I said finally. Not the assets, not the debts, not the liabilities. Please, just take it all. Grant's pen paused. There it was. The word he heard because he was trained to hear it. Liabilities? He asked. Derek cut in before I could answer. Put it in. I want it clear she has no claim to anything. Assets, liabilities, control, all of it. The family trust takes everything. She cannot come back later when Helix Bridge is worth 10 times more and pretend she was owed a piece. Grant looked at him. Derek, we should define— No, Derek said. Broad language. I know how these people work. She is trying to keep a door open. These people? I almost smiled. Tessa leaned toward me while the attorney spoke. Her voice was soft enough that only I could hear. Oliver deserves the life Ethan promised us. I looked at her pendant, my pendant, resting against her collarbone. Then I hope you understand what Ethan promised. Her eyes narrowed, but she did not understand. None of them did. Grant drafted the terms slowly. Mara Bennett waived marital claims. The family trust accepted Helix Bridge Systems, the Chicago residence, associated corporate assets, liquid accounts transferred by the will, and all related ownership control. The family trust assumed all debts, tax obligations, encumbrances, and liabilities tied to those assets, known or unknown, pending or later discovered, including obligations arising before the date of transfer. The trust waived the right to reject pre-existing liabilities after acceptance. Grant read that clause twice. Derek loved it because he thought it locked me out. I loved it because it locked him in. Later, in Julian's office, I signed the draft agreement. The gray sweater lay folded on my lap like a costume waiting for its final scene. Julian watched me cap the pen. If this fails, you walk away with nothing. It already failed for them, I said. They just have not read the balance sheet. Probate court was colder than I expected. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was the way people bring their worst selves into rooms built to make those selves sound civilized. I arrived early in the gray sweater, hair pulled back, face bare. I looked small because I wanted to. A judge seeing a widow surrender under pressure needed to ask questions. A judge asking questions needed Derek to answer. He arrived in a navy suit with a gold pen clipped to his pocket like a trophy. Vanessa held his arm. Lorraine and Charles moved behind them with the solemn pride of people attending their own coronation. Tessa came last, holding Oliver's hand. She was wearing my necklace again. For 1 second, I felt the old Mara rise inside me. The wife who would have begged Ethan to explain. The woman who thought love was something you could repair if you just found the right words. Then Oliver tugged on Tessa's sleeve and whispered that he was hungry, and the moment passed. Ethan had made wreckage of all of us. The difference was that some of us had chosen to weaponize the wreckage against someone else. The judge reviewed the agreement. She looked at me over her glasses. Mrs. Bennett, do you understand that you are giving up potential claims to the Chicago residents? Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand that you are giving up potential claims related to Helix Bridge Systems? Yes. Do you understand that the family trust will assume ownership and associated risk? Yes. Has anyone coerced you into this agreement? Derek's expression sharpened. Lorraine held very still. I let my eyes fill, but not overflow. No, Your Honor, I want a clean break. Julian stood beside me. My client has been advised. She wishes to move on without further conflict. The judge turned to Derek. Mr. Cole, you are acting as representative for the trust? Yes, Your Honor. You understand the trust is accepting not only assets, but debts, encumbrances, tax obligations, and liabilities known or unknown? Derek lifted his chin. This was the moment. He could have hesitated. He could have asked Grant to narrow language. He could have saved himself with one cautious breath. Instead, he smiled. I am a financial professional, Your Honor. I have already begun restructuring Helix Bridge operations. I accept full responsibility on behalf of the trust. My goal is to protect Oliver Bennett's inheritance. Oliver Monroe, I thought. They had not even bothered to get the child's name consistent in the performance. The judge nodded. Very well. The documents were signed. Derek signed with his gold pen. Lorraine smiled like she had finally scrubbed me from the family portrait. Vanessa squeezed Derek's arm. Tessa bent down and whispered to Oliver, Your daddy took care of us. The gavel fell. The transfer was final. For a few minutes, everyone behaved like the story had ended. Derek turned to me in the hallway outside the courtroom, already giving orders. You are not to return to the house, he said. You are not to contact Helix Bridge employees. You are not to speak publicly about this family or the company. If I hear one defamatory comment, the probate matter is finished, I said. He blinked. My voice had changed. Not louder, worse than louder, calm. I reached for the hem of the gray sweater and pulled it over my head. Underneath, I wore a tailored silk blouse the color of bone. I folded the sweater once and placed it over my arm. Vanessa's smile faded first. I smoothed my hair and looked at Derek. Now we can discuss your debt. Grant Wexler went very still. Derek laughed. My debt? Your trust's debt, technically, though your personal guarantees may make the distinction uncomfortable. Grant stepped forward. Mrs. Bennett waived all claims. I waived my rights as Ethan's widow, I said. I did not waive my rights as your secured creditor. Julian opened his briefcase and placed a binder on the table in the consultation room adjacent to the courtroom. I had requested the room in advance. Derek had assumed it was for final settlement copies. People always think the room belongs to them until the documents arrive. Grant opened the binder. I watched his face, not Derek's. Derek would perform disbelief. Grant would calculate. Julian began. Helix Bridge Systems failed to remit employee payroll withholdings over multiple tax periods. Preliminary records indicate approximately $8 million in diverted or unpaid obligations. A protected disclosure has been made to federal investigators. Derek scoffed. That is fake. No, I said. The public filings are fake. Ethan wrote those for people like you? Grant flipped pages faster, his face drained of color. Lorraine looked at him. What does that mean? It means, Julian said, that the company accepted by the trust may be subject to substantial tax liability, penalties, and investigation. Mr. Cole, as acting CEO who has affirmed operational control on the record, has now attached himself to that exposure. Derek turned on Grant. You said this language was standard. Grant's jaw tightened. I warned you about breadth. You were supposed to protect us. I cannot protect you from interrupting me in mediation. Vanessa's hand slipped from Derek's arm. I placed a second document on the table. That is only the first problem. Grant saw the Orchid Gate name and closed his eyes for half a second. Good attorneys know the names of bad lenders. What is Orchid Gate? Charles asked. A private lender? I said. Ethan borrowed $5 million. The note is now in default because the payment due this week was missed. Derek's face changed. Not fear yet. Calculation failing. I never saw that loan. You did not ask for a full audit before seizing the company. I had emergency control. You had arrogance with paperwork, Julian continued. The default triggers acceleration. Full balance due? Interest compounds monthly at 30% after default. The loan is secured by collateral. What collateral? Vanessa demanded. I laid out 3 foreclosure notices, one for the Chicago mansion, one for Lorraine and Charles's Ohio retirement home, one for Derek and Vanessa's Atlanta estate. For a moment, the room was silent enough to hear the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Then Lorraine made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not grief, not anger, animal panic. No, she whispered. Our home is paid off. It was, I said. Charles grabbed the notice with shaking hands. Derek, you said you reviewed everything. Derek pointed at him. Your son was the criminal. Your name is on this, Vanessa screamed. You said the advisory paperwork was ceremonial. It was supposed to be. Grant looked at Derek with open contempt now. Did you sign personal guarantee supplements? Derek did not answer. That was answer enough. Tessa had gone pale. She pulled Oliver closer to her side. What does this mean for Oliver's trust? I looked at her, and for the first time since the funeral, she looked less like an enemy and more like another woman waking up in one of Ethan's traps. It means there is no fortune, I said. The company is a crime scene. The house is leveraged. The accounts are either frozen, pledged, or traceable. Oliver inherited what the adults around him were too greedy to question. Lorraine spun toward Tessa. Do not listen to her. Ethan loved you. He protected Oliver. Tessa's face twisted. Ethan told me there was money. He loved his son. He told me there was money, Tessa repeated louder. I am not raising my son inside a federal investigation because your family wanted a dynasty. She pulled Oliver toward the door. Lorraine reached for the child. You cannot take him. Tessa jerked away. Watch me. And just like that, Lorraine's fantasy of the real family walked out of the room. Derek was sweating now. Who owns the note? Grant looked down at the assignment document. I could see the moment he found it. Blackstone Hollow LLC, he said. Derek frowned. Who the hell is Blackstone Hollow? Grant read further, his mouth tightened. No one breathed. Mara Bennett, he said. Silence is not always empty. Sometimes it is full of every mistake a person has just understood. I looked at Derek. You inherited the company? I bought the debt. He stared at me like I had changed species in front of him. They never asked what I actually did for a living, I said. You thought I was quiet because I was stupid. You thought I was grieving because I was weak. You thought assets were prizes and liabilities were someone else's problem. Derek's voice dropped. Mara, listen, we can work this out. There it was, the turn, the moment powerful men discover negotiation after cruelty fails. I am listening. We need time. A payment plan. The settlement can be modified. The court will understand there was incomplete disclosure. The court asked whether you understood assets and liabilities. You said yes. Grant said nothing. That was how I knew Derek had no easy exit. Lorraine stepped toward me, all her polish gone. Mara, please, Charles cannot lose that house. It is our retirement. You threw my clothes into the rain. Vanessa's face crumpled with rage. You set us up! No, I let you speak. I let you sign. I let you take everything you demanded. Derek slammed his palm on the table. You are destroying us! I leaned in, just enough that he had to stop performing for everyone else and look at me. No, Derek, I am collecting a debt. You destroyed yourselves when you signed for everything you were too greedy to understand. He tried one more time. We are family. That almost made me laugh, but I did not give him the satisfaction. Family does not ambush a widow at a grave. Family does not freeze her grocery money. Family does not throw her coats into the mud while neighbors watch. Family does not tell a woman her infertility made her disposable. You are not my family. You are borrowers in default. Julian slid the formal notice across the table. Blackstone Hollow LLC will provide 30 days to cure the default, he said. $5 million principal, applicable interest, and fees, subject to updated payoff figures. You will also need to resolve federal tax exposure. If not, foreclosure proceedings begin against secured collateral. Charles sank into a chair. Vanessa started crying, but her tears had nowhere to go because she had spent all her sympathy on herself. Lorraine whispered Oliver's name like it was a prayer she no longer controlled. Derek stared at the notices as if hate could edit them. I picked up the gray sweater from the table. For months after, people asked me whether that moment felt good. They wanted me to say yes. They wanted revenge to feel like fireworks, like music swelling, like justice arriving in a clean white coat. It did not feel good. It felt quiet. It felt like stepping out of a burning house and realizing you are still covered in smoke, but your feet are on pavement. It felt like surviving something that had tried very hard to make you smaller. Outside the courthouse, Chicago air cut through my blouse, cold and honest. I stood on the steps with Julian beside me and watched dark clouds gather over the city. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," I said. Then, after a moment, "But I am free." The legal aftermath was not instant. Real life never closes as neatly as people want stories to close. Federal investigators moved in. Helix Bridge employees received notices. Some of them were furious with Ethan, some with Derek, some with me for not stopping it sooner, though I had only learned the truth after being thrown out of my own home. The payroll tax case became bigger than the family expected. Once investigators found the escrow diversions, they followed the shell payments. Tessa was interviewed. Lorraine was interviewed. Charles suddenly remembered documents he had signed without reading. Derek hired counsel who told him to stop posting inspirational leadership quotes on LinkedIn. Blackstone Hollow began enforcement. The Chicago mansion went into receivership first. I did not fight to keep it. People expected me to, but they did not understand that a house built on lies does not become home again just because you win the paperwork. The nursery was packed by a court-appointed inventory team. Julian asked whether I wanted the rocking chair. I said no. Then I changed my mind and took the stuffed elephant because grief is not logical and healing does not require consistency. Lorraine and Charles downsized before foreclosure could complete. Vanessa sold jewelry and screamed at Derek in emails that somehow kept finding their way into discovery. Derek tried to sue Grant for malpractice, but Grant's notes from mediation were excellent. They showed warnings, they showed interruptions. They showed Derek demanding broader language because he wanted to crush any future claim. Greed makes very clear minutes. As for Tessa, she disappeared from the public performance first. Her tribute posts came down. The family photos vanished. Months later, through attorneys, I heard she had moved back near her parents with Oliver. I do not know what she told him about Ethan. I hope someday she tells him enough truth to keep him from worshiping a lie. I hope she does not turn him into another monument to Bennett pride. He deserved better than every adult in that room. And Ethan. For a long time, I did not know where to put Ethan inside me. Dead people are difficult to hate because they cannot answer, and unanswered hate echoes. Some mornings, I miss the man who made coffee too strong and sang off key in the shower. Then I would remember the Ohio photos, the forged signature, the stolen payroll taxes, the necklace around Tessa's throat, and I would understand that the man I missed had been partly real and partly costume. Mourning him meant mourning my own judgment too, and that was the hardest funeral. But I learned something I will never give back. Independence is not selfish, it is protection. The most dangerous people in your life are not always strangers. Sometimes they share your last name. Sometimes they sit at your dinner table, smile for holiday photos, and call their greed love. Sometimes they do not attack you until they think grief has made you too weak to stand. They never asked what I actually did for a living. They thought I answered phones. I found where executives hid stolen money. They thought I was quiet because I was stupid. I was quiet because people confess more when they believe you cannot understand the language of their crimes. They thought they had buried me under Ethan's lies. What they did not understand was that grief made me precise.